So for this next session, I'm going to share some of the things that we learned from the implementation and process evaluation, what we call the IPE. It's a little bit of a mouthful. But essentially, this aspect of our research was about trying to gather data and to develop a qualitative understanding of the context surrounding the implementation of the Englicious intervention. So Jake has talked this morning about the statistical findings. I'm going to talk more about the qualitative side of the data. So for the next few minutes, I'm going to talk a little bit about what the process evaluation looked like, what it involved. So what did we set out to learn? What were our methods for gathering this information? And I'll also have opportunity to share with you some of the findings from this data. For limitations of time, we're not able to share everything, but do, of course, ask questions later if you'd like to know more. So what did we set out to learn? We wanted to know, firstly, about the teachers in our study. So who were the teachers who were involved in our project? We wanted to know things about their teaching background, about their professional development experiences. We wanted to know their views about teaching grammar and writing. We also wanted to learn about their approaches to different aspects of the writing process and how they teach that. And in addition, we wanted to try and capture data on teachers' views and perceptions about the implementation of Englicious as it was happening. We also wanted to gather data, first-hand insights into what teaching and learning looks like on the ground in both of our intervention and comparison schools. So the methods that we used for this aspect of the research involved teacher surveys. So we had a series of surveys, 3 in total. Our pre-intervention survey was our baseline survey. So that went out to every participating teacher, 70 teachers in total, and that went out at the pre-intervention stage, so before any of the Englicious lessons had been taught. You can see from this first table, so we had 47 completions out of a possible 70. The second and third survey, so the mid-intervention and end of intervention surveys, they were completed by our teachers in the intervention group, because as I mentioned, we were trying to capture the teachers' experiences of using Englicious intervention. And again, you can see the figures in terms of completion rates. So those surveys were sent to 33 teachers, and we had 19 completions for the mid-intervention survey and 11 for the end of intervention survey. In addition to the survey data, we conducted school visits to a sample of our intervention schools and to our comparison schools. We visited 20% of each group, so that was 12 schools in total, 6 intervention and 6 comparison schools. So those schools were chosen through a randomized process. Our aim was to visit each of those schools twice, once during the early stages of the intervention, so just as they were starting to teach the Englicious lessons, and we went to visit a second time close to the end of that intervention period, so when the final lessons were being taught. In total, we were able to complete 23 out of 24 visits. Unfortunately, one visit wasn't possible. It wasn't possible for that to take place because there were internal assessments happening at the school when we wanted to go. So during the first visit, that began with a semi-structured interview with the teacher. It was an opportunity for us to learn a bit more about the teacher, to learn about the class, the school, their approaches to teaching grammar and writing, and to explore some of their views. After that initial interview, we had an opportunity to observe either an Englicious lesson in the intervention schools, or we observed a grammar-focused lesson in our control schools. After the teaching of the lesson, we conducted a second interview with the teacher, and that included examples that we had identified from the lesson, and that gave us opportunities really to go into a little bit more depth and to gain that deeper understanding of either how the Englicious intervention was being implemented, or in the control schools, the nature of teaching grammar in that particular context. For the second visit, it followed a very similar format, but this time it was slightly simplified. So again, we had opportunities to observe an Englicious lesson or a grammar-focused lesson in the control schools, and then this was followed by an interview where we talked again more in depth about the teaching and learning that was happening in the lesson that we had just observed. Those interviews also included opportunities to talk to teachers about their perceptions of the impact of the approach that they were using. And that's been really useful for us to develop insights about what they feel is working well and why. All of the interviews were audio recorded and then they were professionally transcribed, and our lesson observations were then written up into specially prepared pro formas. So to share with you some of the findings. So we learned a good deal of information about our teachers' experience and knowledge. This was through our baseline survey that went out to every teacher. One thing to mention is that occasionally the figures don't add up to the total number of respondents because the teacher either maybe missed a question or they chose not to answer a particular question, which they were completely allowed to do. But just to say that didn't happen very often. So this first table on the slide shows you the number of years of primary teaching experience that teachers had in their present school as well as any other schools where they had taught. And you can see here from the table that the majority of teachers have what we consider to be moderate to considerable experience of primary teaching. The survey also asked teachers to tell us about their experience of teaching different year groups in the primary phase, so in their present school as well as other schools. And you can see here that I think the majority of the teachers, they had a good deal of experience in Key Stage 1 year groups, but also some experience of teaching some of the Key Stage 2 year groups. We asked teachers to tell us about their professional development experiences around teaching grammar, okay? 46 out of 47 teachers responded to this question. And we can see that around 2/3 of the respondents had had 4 hours or more professional development on teaching grammar during their career so far. We had about 1/3 of the teachers who had had more than 7 hours training in this area. There was also around 1/3 of teachers who had had 3 hours or less professional development on teaching grammar. We compare this to their professional development on writing, and it looks a little bit different. So most of the teachers had had 4 hours or more training on teaching writing. Around 2/3 of the cohort had had 7 hours or more, and then around half of the cohort had had 12 hours or more professional development in this area. When we asked the teachers to tell us who were the most common providers of the professional development they'd been involved in, most commonly this was through internal staff meetings, so internal sessions run at the school. And secondly, this was followed by training provided by the local authority or an equivalent provider in an off-site location. When we visited the schools as part of the IPE, we asked teachers in the intervention and control schools to tell us about the resources they most commonly use to support their own knowledge and understanding of grammar. It won't surprise anybody to know that teachers told us they draw on a number of resources, and the most common one being talking to colleagues. So quite often this would be the literacy coordinator or the literacy lead in their school. It may be the head teacher, and equally it may be other teachers in their year group or more just generally across the school. Now the list that's going to show up here is listed in terms of the most commonly identified resources in terms of frequency of mention. Would anybody hazard to guess at what's the second most commonly named resource that we were given by teachers? Google, absolutely correct. So the second most commonly used resource was the Google search function. Interestingly, teachers said that they did often use Google, but they also recognized that Google is not always a reliable source of information. And also, it can be incredibly overwhelming because there is so much stuff out there. And there is work to be done sometimes to siphon out what is useful, what is reliable, and what content they can actually use and to rely on as part of their teaching or to support their own subject knowledge. So that was really interesting. Additional resources they used were online resources such as BBC Bitesize, YouTube, government guidance, so the national curriculum documentation. And then teachers also talked about using commercially published resources, including schemes of work. So things like Rainbow Grammar, TES, primary resources, Talk for Writing, the Collins Dictionary online site. So in our visits with schools, we asked teachers to tell us about their views about the role of grammar in teaching writing. We had an overwhelmingly positive response to this question. Several of the teachers mentioned the word important in their responses to us when we asked about this question. But of the 10 teachers, 10 of 12 teachers who had a really positive view about the role of grammar in teaching writing, 2 teachers said that they had doubts about whether it's really necessary or really beneficial for children to know all of those grammatical terms that they're expected to learn in year 2. We visited schools for a second time and we asked teachers the same question again. Were there any changes in their views about the role of grammar in teaching writing? Had anything changed over a period of time? But again, teachers expressed a wholly positive view about that. But when we asked them about their views on the grammar specification in the national curriculum, there we have something more of a mixed picture. So 7 out of 12 of the teachers shared concerns with us about that. So they used very similar phrases in their answers. They said things like, it's a lot, it's idealistic. One teacher said she felt that the specification pushes children too soon. Okay. We had 4 teachers who shared either a positive or a neutral view. And actually one teacher who spoke positively, she said that was really down to her familiarity and her experience of teaching Key Stage 1. She was very comfortable with what she was expected to do, what the children were expected to learn at that stage. But she acknowledged that if she was to move into Key Stage 2, it would be a very different picture. She wouldn't feel as secure or as confident, and she knew that there would be work to be done in order to be comfortable with what she was expected to teach and also learning about what children needed to know at those different year groups. Some of the teachers, they talked about some concerns and made some suggestions. So some teachers said that maybe children should be given more time to consolidate their learning. And they made suggestions that might happen through introducing some concepts earlier in the curriculum. They felt that that could take the pressure off them as teachers and also children in terms of how much they're expected to cover in year 2. One teacher talked about concerns about there being an overemphasis on grammar in writing assessments, and they feel that that's detrimental to children's creativity, so the development of that creative narrative flair in their writing. So for the last few minutes, I'll talk a little bit about what we identified as key differences between schools' approaches to teaching grammar compared to what happens in the Englicious lessons. So we did see quite a number of similarities in terms of how grammar is taught in schools compared to the Englicious lessons, but there were some noticeable differences. This is based on our observations of the lessons and also our discussions with the teachers as part of our school visits. So the differences particularly related to the types of opportunities offered as part of teaching and learning about grammar, and also the consistency and frequency of opportunities. So what we saw in the Englicious lessons was that there are consistent opportunities for children to apply their learning through independent writing tasks that happen in every single lesson. In the lessons that we saw happening in the control schools, that didn't seem to be a regular, sort of consistent, frequent feature. We also saw, to varying degrees, that in the control schools, there were opportunities for children to physically interact with language, to play, to manipulate language in the ways that Baz has talked about earlier, and we've heard some of the teachers talk about in their presentations. But again, that wasn't seen as frequently or as consistently as seems to happen in the Englicious lessons. So the opportunity to come around, play with language, to move things around, to test how it works, and to see if something works or it doesn't work, that is a consistent feature in Englicious that we didn't tend to see in the control schools. And if we think about maybe quite a specific example, I'm going to talk about the use of the interactive whiteboard. So in the Englicious lessons, the IWB is used as an opportunity for children to take a turn, to come up to the board, to have a go at playing with language by moving things around on the screen, trying to create different structures. We did see really engaging lessons in the control schools. We saw children who seemed to really enjoy the lessons. And we did see the use of the interactive whiteboard in some of the lessons. But, and in some cases, it was being used in an interactive way. But by and large, what we saw was the interactive whiteboard being used more for display purposes. So really to show examples, to show questions, to show definitions and exemplars, rather than opportunities for children to actually try and play around with language structures. And just to finish, I'll share with you some of the things that we learned about the teachers' perceptions of the effectiveness of Englicious. So in our mid-intervention and end-of-intervention surveys, we asked teachers whether they felt that the Englicious intervention was having an impact on the children's writing. 13 out of 17 respondents said that they felt it was having a moderate positive impact on children's writing. And in the end of intervention survey, 10 out of 11 teachers agreed or strongly agreed that it was having a positive impact on the way that children were writing and communicating their meanings in their written work. In the school visits, we asked teachers in the interviews about their perceptions of impact on children's learning. And during the first visit, unsurprisingly, quite a number of teachers said it's possibly too soon to know. They had only just started teaching the intervention, so very understandable. But having said that, there were also comments given to us that they felt the intervention was maybe helping to improve children's awareness about language. It was helping them to remember and understand the terms. It was giving them a shared language between the teacher and the children. One teacher said that she felt the lessons were helping her children to become more conscious writers because they were very aware of the types of words that they were using in their writing. Teachers also spoke about beneficial aspects of the intervention, what they particularly liked and why. So they said that they really liked the interactive activities that were offered to children, and they felt that often these led to really useful discussions in the classroom. They liked that the lessons offered variety, that the tasks were age appropriate, they were manageable for the children, and that there was frequent opportunities for children to apply their learning. So as we said, there was opportunities in every lesson for children to have a go at writing, to apply what they'd learned through the course of that lesson. And finally, several teachers also talked about finding English as being a really valuable resource for them. So in addition to what they were seeing as potential benefits for the children, they also found that Englicious was really useful for them as a practitioner. So they felt reassured that the content was informed, that it was reliable, which was really reassuring compared to some of the resources that they know that are out there that are maybe not so. And they really valued the structure of the